On the 19th of July, 2024, Dr. Eva Langen, the chief forensic pathologist of the University Hospital Cologne, received a call that would lead her to one of the most disturbing cases of her 20-year career. "Dr. Langen, we have a situation here that you need to look at," said Chief Inspector Michael Steinberg, with a voice that expressed confusion and dismay. "A 38-year-old colleague of ours, Chief Inspector Thomas Reuter, has been admitted to the hospital. His symptoms are unusual. He suffers from massive neurological failures that have completely destroyed his masculinity. The attending physician suspects a rare poisoning, but we cannot identify the substance." What Dr. Langen would discover in the following hours was a medical puzzle that revealed a perfidious new form of crime, a woman who did not kill men, but robbed them of their most fundamental identity and left them as living shadows of themselves. Thomas Reuter had been a man known for his strength and competence. At 38 years old, he embodied the ideal of a successful investigator, analytical, fearless, and incorruptible. As chief inspector with the Criminal Police Cologne, he had earned a reputation as one of the sharpest minds in the department. His colleagues respected his ability to expose liars and solve complex crimes. Thomas was a tall, athletically built man with distinctive facial features and a natural authority that opened many doors for him both professionally and privately. Professionally, Thomas was a perfectionist. He spent hours studying interrogation protocols, analyzing evidence, and creating perpetrator profiles. His clearance rate was over 90%, and he was considered a candidate for promotion to criminal counselor. Colleagues described him as a man who could literally smell criminals, an intuition that served him invaluably at work. However, this professional brilliance had developed a downside. Thomas had become increasingly self-confident after his divorce 2 years ago, regarding his ability to see through people. "I recognize manipulation from 100 meters away," he used to say. This arrogance, coupled with his newly discovered freedom as a divorced man, paradoxically made him vulnerable to exactly the kind of deception he warned others about. His marriage to Martina had fallen apart after 10 years, not through a dramatic break, but through the creeping realization that they had grown in different directions. Martina had accused him of being emotionally inaccessible and putting his work above the family. The divorce had proceeded civilly, but the loss of daily contact with his 9-year-old daughter Emma pained Thomas deeply. After the separation, Thomas had gone through a phase that his colleagues observed with growing concern. The disciplined investigator transformed in his free hours into a man who sought to make up for the missed life. He frequented bars, maintained affairs with significantly younger women, and developed a lifestyle that was hardly compatible with his previous character. What Thomas did not suspect, his new willingness to take risks and his belief in his ability to judge people, made him the perfect target for a woman who practiced a completely new type of crime. A woman who did not rob or kill men, but did something much more cruel to them. Noura Al-Hassan was 29 years old and embodied a dangerous combination of exotic beauty and cold calculation. She had come to Germany from Syria 5 years ago, officially as a refugee, but actually with intentions far removed from what her asylum application suggested. Noura was a woman of classic Mediterranean beauty, with long black hair, dark eyes, and a figure that regularly left men speechless. Her German was accent-free, her education impressive, and she mastered the art of seduction with the precision of a science. Officially, Noura worked in a cosmetic studio in Dusseldorf, but actually she lived from the generous gifts of a series of men who all mysteriously disappeared from her life again. What connected these men was not only their generosity, but also the strange health problems they developed after their time with Noura. Noura was not an ordinary fraudster. She was not primarily interested in money or material goods, although she considered these as a byproduct of her true passion. Her actual obsession was power, the power to break strong, self-confident men and rob them of their masculine identity. She had cultivated contacts over years, with circles where rare chemicals and exotic poisons were traded. Her specialty was substances that attack the nervous system, especially those areas responsible for male sexual function. For Noura, every new conquest was an experiment, an opportunity to refine her methods and expand her collection of broken men. She carefully selected her victims, successful, self-confident middle-aged men who believed they could see through and control any woman. The more arrogant and self-confident they were, the greater her satisfaction when she destroyed them. Thomas Reuter was the perfect victim. It was a warm Friday evening in June when Thomas Reuter entered the bar Horizont in downtown Cologne. He had just completed a particularly difficult case, solving a fraud series that had cost him weeks of intensive investigative work. His colleagues had invited him for an after-work drink, but Thomas had declined. He needed time for himself, time to reduce stress and find himself again. The bar was elegantly and modernly furnished, with subdued lighting and a relaxed atmosphere that attracted successful business people and professionals. Thomas ordered a whiskey and sat at the bar, content to let his thoughts wander and review the week. It was exactly in this moment of relaxation and inattention that Noura Al-Hassan entered the bar. She wore an elegant black dress that perfectly accentuated her figure without appearing intrusive. Her walk was self-confident and graceful, and when she sat down only 2 stools away from Thomas, he could not help but notice her. Noura ordered a red wine and pulled a book from her handbag, a work on criminology that immediately caught Thomas's attention. It was no coincidence. Noura had already been observing Thomas for weeks, studying his habits and finding out which bars he frequented. The book was a carefully chosen prop. "Excuse me," said Thomas after a few minutes and turned to her. "I couldn't help but notice what you're reading. Do you work professionally with criminology?" Noura looked up and smiled, a warm but slightly shy smile that was perfectly calculated. "Actually, it's just a hobby," she answered with a light accent that seemed exotic but not disturbing. "I find the human psyche fascinating, especially the dark sides. And you? You look like someone who deals with this professionally." Thomas was flattered by her observational skills. "I'm a police officer, criminal police to be exact, Thomas Reuter." He extended his hand to her. "Noura Al-Hassan," she replied and took his hand. Her handshake was firm and self-confident. "How fascinating. Then you deal daily with the topics I only read about." What followed was a conversation that Thomas experienced as one of the most intellectually stimulating of his life. Noura asked intelligent questions about his work, showed genuine interest in his cases, and demonstrated an understanding of criminal psychology that went far beyond that of a layperson. "You really have a sharp mind," said Thomas after an hour of intensive conversation. "It's rare to meet someone who can speak so thoughtfully about these topics." "Thank you," replied Noura, and modestly lowered her gaze. "But I'm sure that in your profession you see things that are not written in any book. That must be psychologically very stressful." This remark caught Thomas unprepared. Here was someone who understood what his work really meant, who recognized the emotional costs that other people often overlooked. "It's actually not easy," he admitted. "Especially after my divorce, I find it difficult to switch off in the evenings." Noura nodded understandingly. "Divorces are always hard, especially for people in stressful professions." "Do you have children?" "A daughter, 9 years old. She's the most important thing in my life." Thomas's voice became softer when he spoke about Emma. "You can feel that," said Noura. "You have something protective about you. That's attractive in a man." These words flattered Thomas's ego and simultaneously touched his loneliness. Here was an intelligent, beautiful woman who not only understood him, but also appreciated him. "Would you like to have another drink?" asked Thomas spontaneously. "I know a quieter place where we can talk better." Noura hesitated a moment, perfectly calculated to signal interest without desperation. "That would be very nice, Thomas, but I should warn you, I'm very selective when it comes to men." Thomas laughed. "Then it will be an interesting challenge for me." They moved to a smaller, more intimate bar, where the conversation became even deeper. Noura told of her past in Syria, of the difficulties of integration, of her work in the cosmetic studio. She presented herself as a strong, independent woman who had gone her way despite all challenges. "Germany has given me a new chance," she said, "but sometimes I feel very lonely here. It's hard to find people who really understand you." Thomas felt a strong connection to this woman. Here was someone who, like him, had mastered challenges, who united strength and vulnerability within herself. At the end of the evening, they exchanged telephone numbers. "I would like to see you again, Noura," said Thomas. "I would too," she replied and kissed him gently on the cheek. "But Thomas, I move slowly in relationships. I need time to build trust." This apparent restraint only made her more desirable in Thomas's eyes. He drove home with the feeling of having found something special. What Thomas didn't know, every moment of their being together had been carefully staged by Noura. She had studied his weaknesses, his loneliness after the divorce, his pride in his professional abilities, his need for intellectual stimulation. The perfect game had begun. If you believe that experience and knowledge of human nature protect against manipulation, then subscribe to this channel, because the sophisticated seductress studied the psyche of her victims as intensively as a hunter analyzes the behavior of his prey. Thomas Reuter's story shows how deadly it can be when professional arrogance meets calculated seduction. In the following weeks, a relationship developed between Thomas and Noura that seemed to have all the characteristics of a perfect romance. Noura was the ideal partner, intellectually stimulating but not challenging, independent but attentive, passionate but not intrusive. She seemed to know exactly when to come closer and when to maintain distance to keep Thomas's interest alive. Their dates were carefully choreographed, although Thomas never noticed. Noura chose restaurants and locations that suited Thomas's taste, spoke about topics that fascinated him, and showed interest in aspects of his life that other women often found boring. When Thomas spoke about complicated criminal cases, she not only listened, but asked thoughtful questions that showed she really understood what he was dealing with. "You're the first woman who really understands what my work means," said Thomas after their fourth date. They were sitting in a small Italian restaurant, and Noura had just made a particularly clever observation about the psychology of serial killers. "Your work is fascinating, Thomas," replied Noura. "You save people and bring justice. That's admirable." She placed her hand on his. "But it must also be lonely, always being confronted with the dark sides of humanity." This mixture of admiration and empathy was exactly what Thomas's battered ego needed after the divorce. Martina had often accused him that his work took up too much space in his life. Noura, however, saw his calling as something noble and important. After 6 weeks, Thomas dared to take the next step. "Noura, I would like to introduce you to my colleagues," he said. "Jens is organizing a small barbecue party at his house. It would be a good opportunity for you to get to know the people who are important to me." Noura hesitated a moment, again a calculated reaction. "Are you sure it's not too early? We've only known each other for a month and a half." "I'm sure," replied Thomas. "You've become important to me, Noura. I want you to become part of my life." The barbecue party at Jens Bader's took place on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Jens was Thomas's partner at the criminal police and his closest friend for years. He had observed the change in Thomas and was curious about the woman who had so influenced his colleague. Noura came in an elegant but not too formal summer dress that emphasized her natural beauty without appearing ostentatious. She brought an expensive wine and a homemade dessert, baklava, which she described as a family recipe. "That's very thoughtful of you," said Jen's wife Marion when Noura handed her the sweet dish. "It looks delicious." "In my culture, it's important to show hospitality," replied Noura modestly. "Besides, I wanted to make a good first impression." During the party, Jens observed Noura attentively. As an experienced investigator, he had developed a sense for people, and something about Noura irritated him, even though he couldn't exactly name what it was. She was charming, intelligent, and attentive, perhaps even too perfect. "Thomas is a special man," said Noura to Jens when they stood alone at the drinks table for a moment. "He tells me that you've been working together for a long time." "Almost 10 years, confirmed Jens. "He's one of the best investigators I know, and a good friend. You can feel that. He speaks very respectfully about you." Noura paused. "I hope you don't find it strange that I say this, but I sometimes worry about him. He carries so much responsibility, and after his divorce, he sometimes seems vulnerable." This remark surprised Jens. It was unusual for someone who had only known Thomas for a short time to have such deep insight into his emotional state. "He's stronger than he sometimes appears," replied Jens cautiously. "I believe that too," said Noura, "but strong men sometimes need someone to look after them." At the end of the party, Thomas was overjoyed. "Everyone loved you," he said to Noura as he drove her home. Marion asked 3 times for the baklava recipe, and even Jens was impressed. "They're all very nice," replied Noura. "I understand why they're so important to you." What Thomas hadn't caught was the brief conversation between Jens and Marion at the end of the party. "What do you think of her?" Jens had asked his wife. "She's beautiful and charming," Marion had replied. "But I can't say exactly why. She somehow seems calculating, as if she's playing a role." "I felt that too," Jens had admitted. "But maybe we're just too suspicious. Thomas seems happier than I've seen him since the divorce." Nora had naturally not heard these conversations, but she had noticed the skeptical looks. It didn't bother her. On the contrary, she enjoyed the challenge of convincing even the most suspicious people of her innocence. A week later, Nora took the decisive step. She invited Thomas to her home. "I would like to cook for you," she said, "a traditional Syrian meal, but I have to warn you, it's very spicy and intense. Not every German palate can handle it." Thomas laughed. "I love spicy food. That won't be a problem. Then come to me tomorrow evening. I'll show you how to honor a special man in Syria." What Thomas didn't know, this evening would change his life forever. Nora's apartment in Dusseldorf was a revelation for Thomas. It was tastefully furnished with a mixture of modern European furniture and traditional Oriental elements. Persian carpets covered the floor, artful calligraphies adorned the walls, and the scent of exotic spices hung in the air. "Your home is beautiful," said Thomas as Nora led him through the apartment. "It perfectly reflects your personality, elegant and mysterious." "Thank you," smiled Nora. "I tried to bring a piece of my homeland here without forgetting the German side of my new life." The kitchen was the highlight of the apartment, professionally equipped with expensive appliances and an impressive collection of spices and herbs that Thomas couldn't partially identify. "Do you often cook so elaborately?" asked Thomas. "Only for very special people," replied Nora and kissed him gently. "And you are very special, Thomas." The dinner was a feast for the senses. Nora had prepared an abundance of dishes: grilled lamb with exotic marinades, stuffed vine leaves, various dips and sauces, and rice prepared with saffron, pine nuts, and dried fruits. With everything, there was a special tea that Nora described as a family tradition. "This tea is very important in my culture," she explained while handing Thomas a steaming cup. "It's made from rare herbs that only grow in certain regions of Syria. My grandmother always prepared it for special guests." Thomas smelled the tea. It had an intense, almost numbing scent, a mixture of unknown herbs and something he couldn't identify. "It smells very strong," Thomas noted. "Those are the traditional spices," explained Nora. "In Syria, we say, the more intense the taste, the deeper the connection between the people who share it." She raised her own cup. "Let's drink together, as a sign of our growing connection." Thomas hesitated a moment. The tea really smelled very strong, almost medicinal. But Nora's expectant eyes and the romantic gesture convinced him. "To our future," he said and raised his cup. "To our future," echoed Nora. They drank simultaneously. Thomas had to control himself not to cough. The tea was bitter and burning, with a metallic aftertaste that remained on his tongue. "That's very intense," said Thomas and tried to smile. "The best things in life are intense," replied Nora and observed him attentively. "How do you feel?" "A bit dizzy," admitted Thomas. "But that's probably from the wine and the rich food." "Let's go to the living room," suggested Nora. "You can lie down on the sofa and relax." Thomas actually felt strange, not just dizzy, but also slightly disoriented. His reflexes seemed slowed, and a warm feeling spread from his stomach. "I think I drank too much," he murmured. "Just a bit of fresh air," said Nora, and led him to the terrace. "That will do you good." The night air was cool and refreshing, but Thomas's dizziness intensified. His vision began to blur, and he felt his control over his body waning. "Nora, I don't feel well," he said, and reached for her arm. "Shh, everything is fine." She calmed him with a voice that suddenly sounded different, colder, more controlled. "You just need to relax." "What was in the tea?" asked Thomas as a dull fear rose in him. "Just herbs," replied Nora. "Very special herbs." That was the last thing Thomas heard clearly before darkness overcame him. Thomas awoke the next morning in his own bed, without being able to remember how he had gotten there. His head was pounding, his mouth was dry as desert sand, and a metallic taste still lay on his tongue. But these were not the most disturbing aspects of his condition. When he tried to get up, he noticed a frightening weakness in his legs. His muscles trembled as if they were no longer under his control. Even more alarming, however, was the complete absence of any sexual sensation or responsiveness, a condition that was completely unnatural for an otherwise healthy 38-year-old man. "What the hell?" murmured Thomas and tried to organize his scattered memories. He remembered the dinner at Nora's, the strange tea, but after that everything was blurred and fragmented. He reached for his phone and saw several missed calls from Nora. The first message had come in at 6 o'clock in the morning. "Dearest Thomas, I hope you got home safely. You were so tired last night. Call me when you wake up." Thomas dialed her number, but it went directly to voicemail. He tried several times, but Noura was unreachable. In the bathroom, Thomas looked at himself in the mirror and was shocked. His skin had a yellowish coloring, his eyes were bloodshot, and his normally muscular stature appeared weak and sunken. Even more disturbing was the complete absence of any masculine reaction, even to conscious stimulation. This can't be normal, thought Thomas, and decided to see a doctor. Dr. Werner Hoffman, Thomas's family doctor for years, was alarmed by his patient's appearance. "Thomas, what happened to you? You look like you've been through a severe poisoning." "I don't know," replied Thomas honestly. "I was at a friend's for dinner last night. After that, I can only remember fragments." Dr. Hoffman conducted a thorough examination and ordered extensive blood tests. "Thomas, your reflexes are severely slowed, your pupils react abnormally, and your blood values show signs of toxic stress. What did you consume last night?" Thomas told about the dinner, the unusual tea, and his strange condition afterward. Dr. Hoffman frowned. "That sounds like a targeted poisoning," said Dr. Hoffman seriously. "Thomas, I'm referring you immediately for toxicological examination to the university hospital. What you describe are classic symptoms of neurotoxin poisoning." "Neurotoxin?" Thomas was shocked. "You mean someone deliberately poisoned me?" "The symptoms suggest it, especially the neurological failures you describe." Dr. Hoffman hesitated. "Thomas, do you have reason to assume that someone wanted to harm you?" Thomas thought of Noura, of her care and attention. It seemed impossible that she could have done something to him. "No, I can't imagine that." But while he was driving to the hospital, a doubt gnawed at him. Why couldn't he remember how he had gotten home? Why was Noura unreachable? And why did his body feel as if it had been poisoned from the inside out? Dr. Eva Langen looked at Thomas's laboratory results with growing dismay. As one of Germany's leading forensic pathologists, she had seen many unusual poisoning cases, but what she found in Thomas's blood was extraordinary even by her standards. "Mr. Reuter," she said, and sat down opposite him in the examination room. "Your blood values show traces of at least 3 different substances that are normally not used in combination." Thomas leaned forward. "What kind of substances?" "The first is tetrodotoxin, an extremely potent nerve poison that normally occurs in pufferfish. The second is a synthetic neurotransmitter inhibitor that is normally used in research. The third," Dr. Langen hesitated. "The third substance is particularly disturbing. It's an experimental drug that attacks the nerve pathways responsible for male sexual function." Thomas turned pale. "You mean someone deliberately poisoned me with substances intended to destroy my masculinity?" "That's how I would put it, yes. Whoever did this had very specific knowledge about neurotoxicology and access to extremely rare chemicals." "Doctor?" Langen leaned back. "Mr. Reuter, this was not a random crime. This was a targeted attack on your physical and psychological integrity." Thomas felt as if the ground was being pulled out from under his feet. "Is the damage permanent?" "Further examinations must show that. Some nerve damage can regenerate, others cannot. It depends on how long the toxins were in your system and how high the concentration was." "And the woman I had dinner with, could she?" "Mr. Reuter, as a forensic pathologist, I must say, the type of poisons used and the precise dosage suggest that the perpetrator either had medical knowledge or access to someone who had it. These substances are not orderable on the internet." Dr. Langen opened her laptop. "I have already contacted colleagues in other cities. In the last 18 months, there have been at least 5 similar cases in Germany. Vermindry, all concerned men between 35 and 45. All had contact with attractive women with migration backgrounds before their poisoning." 5 others? Thomas was horrified. "All showed similar symptoms to you. But Mr. Reuter, you're lucky. You're the first who has survived." Chief Inspector Jens Bader sat in his office and stared incredulously at the report that Dr. Langen had transmitted to him. His best friend and colleague had become the victim of one of the most perfidious crimes he had ever seen. The details of the case took his breath away, not only the brutality of the act, but also the cold precision with which it had been carried out. Thomas was still in the hospital, stabilized, but with an uncertain prognosis. The doctors hoped that part of the neurological damage would recede, but they could give no guarantees. What disturbed Jens most, however, was not only his friend's physical condition, but also the psychological effects of the attack. Thomas, who had always been the most self-confident and dominant man in every room, had become a shadow of himself. Jens immediately activated a specialized investigation team consisting of the most experienced detectives in the department. "We have here a case of systematic poisoning with neurotoxic substances," he announced at the first team meeting. His voice was calm, but his colleagues recognized the suppressed anger in his eyes. "The victim is one of us, Chief Inspector Thomas Reuter. The main suspect is a woman named Noura Al-Hassan, but we have reason to believe that's not her real name." He projected photos of Noura on the wall, surveillance camera shots from the bar where she had met Thomas, as well as pictures of her apartment building. Beautiful, intelligent, charming, and possibly one of the most dangerous criminals we've ever dealt with. She not only poisoned Thomas, but systematically robbed him of his masculine identity. Detective Sarah Koch, an experienced profiling expert, studied the photos intensively. "Chief, the pattern is extremely specific. She didn't try to kill, at least not with Thomas. This suggests a development in her modus operandi. Maybe she decided that death is too merciful." The first lead led to Noura's apartment in Dusseldorf. When the investigation team arrived there, the apartment was not only empty, but so thoroughly cleaned as if no one had ever lived there. It had been a professional clearing, no fingerprints, no DNA traces, even the carpets had been treated with industrial cleaning agents. This is the work of a professional, noted crime scene technician Meyer while searching for hidden traces with special UV lamps. Whoever did this knew exactly what we would be looking for. But the investigators found an important clue that broke through Noura's perfection. In a hidden compartment under the kitchen sink, which had apparently been overlooked, they discovered remains of chemicals and a small collection of medical syringes. Some of the syringes still contained tiny residues of an oily substance. "Send everything to the lab immediately," ordered Jens. "I want to know what she was working with, where she got it, and above all, I want to know who she really islanded." While the technical examination was running, the team traced Noura's identity back. What they found out was frightening and revealing at the same time. Sarah Koch came back after 2 days of intensive research with a thick dossier. "Noura Al-Hassan doesn't exist," she reported at the next team meeting. "The identity is completely falsified, but very professionally. Whoever did this had access to high-quality forged documents and a complete background story." She opened her laptop and showed the team a complex timeline. The real Noura Al-Hassan was a Syrian refugee girl who died in a bomb attack in Aleppo in 2021. Someone took over her identity and created a completely new biography. "Who is she then?" asked Jens, although he already had a dark suspicion. "We're still trying to find that out, but it gets worse, Chief." Sarah clicked through a series of police reports. "I found connections to the other 5 cases that Dr. Langen mentioned. In each case, there was a woman with similar characteristics: attractive, migration background, supposedly educated, but with an identity that doesn't hold up under closer examination." Jens studied the files with growing horror. Munich, Frankfurt, Berlin, Stuttgart, Hamburg, everywhere the same pattern. Successful, middle-aged men, all self-confident and in leadership positions, met an enchanting woman, spent an intensive evening with her, and were found poisoned afterward. All had died within 48 hours. "She's a serial killer," said Jens quietly while looking at the photos of the victims. "But what's her motive, and why did she change her method with Thomas?" The answer came from an unexpected witness who contacted the police after a television appeal. Dr. Khalil Mansour was a retired doctor who had worked in the emergency room of the Dusseldorf University Hospital before his retirement. When he heard about Noura's case on the news, he contacted the police. "I think I know this woman," he said to Jens. "But she wasn't called Noura Al-Hassan. She was called Amira Qasim and came to me in the emergency room about 4 years ago." Dr. Mansour told a story that shed a completely new light on the case. She had been severely abused by her German boyfriend, a wealthy businessman. He had not only physically injured her, but also psychologically destroyed her. She told me that he had treated her like an object, had systematically attacked her dignity and her femininity. "What happened then?" asked Jens. "She disappeared from the hospital before we could notify the police. But a year later I saw her again, transformed. She had undergone surgery, looked completely different, and she was studying medical literature on neurotoxicology." Dr. Mansour showed Jens a photo from the hospital files. It was definitely the same woman, but with a completely different appearance. "She said something to me then that stayed in my memory," continued Dr. Mansour. Men take what they want and leave women broken behind. But what if one could take from them what defines them most? Their masculinity, murmured Jens. Exactly. She wasn't just out for revenge. She wanted to rob these men of their most fundamental identity, just as her boyfriend had done to her. With this new information, the investigators could reconstruct Amira's true identity. She had indeed come from Syria, but not as a refugee. She had entered with a student visa and had sought relationships with wealthy German men. One of these men, Marcus Weber, a real estate mogul from Munich, had systematically abused and humiliated her. The relationship had been so destructive that Amira had suffered severe damage both physically and psychologically. After the separation from Weber, she disappeared for 2 years, reported Detective Koch. During this time, she underwent multiple surgeries at a private clinic in Switzerland and secretly studied chemistry and pharmacology. She systematically prepared herself to destroy men, said Jens. This wasn't spontaneous revenge. This was a long-term planned campaign. The investigations revealed that Amira had a network of contacts who procured rare chemicals for her. She had connections to corrupt pharmacists, research laboratories, and even criminal organizations that dealt in experimental drugs. With Amira's true identity, the investigators could follow her trail. She had already left Germany, but Interpol was informed, and an international manhunt was initiated. She's clever and well prepared, said Jens to his team, but she made one mistake. She left Thomas alive. Thomas had meanwhile been released from the hospital, but the physical and psychological scars would remain. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that part of his neurological functions could regenerate, but the damage to his self-confidence and identity was severe. I feel like I'm no longer the man I was, Thomas confided to Jens. She didn't just harm me physically, she attacked my entire identity. That was her goal, replied Jens. But Thomas, you're alive. You can heal, and you can help us stop her. Thomas agreed to help with the manhunt. He worked with profiling experts to analyze Amira's psychological pattern. She selects her victims very carefully, Thomas recognized. Successful, self-confident men who believe they can see through any woman. Men like me. And she studies them for months, added profiler Dr. Weber. She learns their weaknesses, their longings, their fears. Then she presents herself as the perfect partner. The manhunt led the team through all of Europe. Amira had been sighted in Paris, then in Rome, finally in Istanbul. She seemed to be trying to return to Syria. But Amira made a crucial mistake. In Istanbul, she contacted an old acquaintance, a chemist who had procured substances for her in the past. This contact was monitored by Interpol. The arrest took place in a luxury hotel in Istanbul. Amira had undergone plastic surgery again and looked completely different, but DNA tests confirmed her identity. During her interrogation, she showed no remorse. These men got what they deserved, she said coldly to the investigators. They take what they want without thinking about the consequences. I just showed them what it's like to be helpless and broken. You murdered 6 people, Jens confronted her via video link. I neutralized 6 predators, corrected Amira. Marcus Weber tortured, humiliated, and abused me for 2 years. The others were the same. They saw women as objects, as toys. That doesn't justify murder, says the man whose best friend almost died because he was too arrogant to see the truth. Amira's eyes flashed dangerously. Thomas Reuter believed he could see through any woman. He treated me like a conquest, a trophy. He got what all men like him deserve. The interrogation revealed the full extent of Amira's crimes. She had not only poisoned the 6 known victims, but had attacked at least 12 other men in various European countries. Some had survived, but were permanently damaged. Others had died without their deaths being recognized as murders. She was one of the most efficient serial killers of modern times, said Dr. Weber to the media. She exploited social prejudices about women. No one suspected an attractive, seemingly vulnerable woman of systematic poisoning. 2 years after Amira's arrest, Thomas Reuter sat in his office at the criminal police and read the final report of her case. She had been sentenced to life imprisonment, but that brought him only limited comfort. The physical damage had partially receded, but Thomas was no longer the man he had been before the encounter with Amira. The self-confidence that had once distinguished him had given way to constant caution. His trust in his ability to judge people was shattered, and his relationships with women were marked by mistrust. I have learned that intelligence and experience don't protect against manipulation, said Thomas to Dr. Weber, who treated him regularly. Amira knew my weaknesses better than I did myself. His ex-wife Martina had reconnected with him after his attack. "You were always too self-confident," she said during one of their conversations. "But no one deserves what happened to you." Thomas nodded. Amira was right. She showed me what it's like to be helpless. But unlike her, I won't let this experience turn me into a monster. He now worked in a specialized department that dealt with crimes against vulnerable adults. His personal experience gave him an understanding of victims that he hadn't had before. "Manipulation is one of the most perfidious forms of violence," he told trainings for young police officers. "It uses our most human characteristics against us, our need for love, understanding, and connection. That doesn't make us weak, that makes us human." Amira was imprisoned in a high-security prison in Germany. She continued to show no remorse and claimed that her actions had been justified. Psychiatric evaluations described her as a woman who had become a cold, calculating killer through severe trauma. Thomas visited her once in prison, not out of revenge, but to understand. "Why me?" he asked her. "Because you were perfect," replied Amira without any emotion. "Successful, self-confident, convinced of your superiority. You were exactly like all the others. I never hurt you." "You would have," said Amira. "All men like you do it, sooner or later. I just made the first strike." Thomas left the prison with the realization that some wounds never heal. Amira would always be trapped by her past, unable to forgive or heal. He, however, had made a different choice. He wouldn't let her act destroy him. Instead, he would use her lesson, not to hurt others, but to help others. On his 40th birthday, Thomas received a letter from a young colleague whom he had helped solve a similar case. "You showed me that strength doesn't mean being invulnerable," wrote the young man. "True strength lies in learning from wounds and helping others." Thomas smiled for the first time in months. Perhaps that had been Amira's biggest mistake. She had believed she could destroy him by taking away his masculinity. But true masculinity didn't lie in physical dominance or emotional invulnerability. It lay in the ability to heal, to help, and to hope. Thomas Reuter was no longer the self-confident investigator he had once been, but he had become something better, a man who understood that true strength lies in vulnerability, and that the greatest form of revenge is to heal and help others. If you or someone you know has become a victim of manipulation or abuse, you are not alone, and it is not your fault. Manipulation uses our most human characteristics against us, our need for love, understanding, and connection. That doesn't make us weak, that makes us human. Trust your gut feeling. Listen to people close to you when they express concerns. And remember, true love respects boundaries and never pressures for hasty decisions.